Hello, and welcome to the Bacon Lodge. I'm Josh, and today I'm going to show you how I made these shaker-style cabinet doors. It's a pretty simple style of doors. With that being said, I'm not a professional at this in any way, and I'm sure I made some mistakes. This is only the second time I've made these doors. I know there's some imperfections in it, and I'll actually address some of them as I go through the video on how I would make it better in the future. But for now, we're just going to show you how I made these. Welcome to Bacon's Lodge, where I will build many things, fix even more, and try to make it an adventure along the way. The first thing is the parts of the door are the rails are on the top and bottom, and the vertical boards are called stiles, and the insert in the middle is called a panel. Probably mess those up throughout the video, but I wanted to make sure I tell you what it is because that's what people say they are. For the wood that I use for it, the face is a solid walnut. The width is a 2 1/8 inch, and the depth is 1 1/8 inch. The inside panel is made out of a 1/4 inch walnut face plywood. Now that we kind of know what the parts are, I want to tell you how I figured out the dimensions of it. So I needed 3 sets of doors for the cabinet that I'm making. 2 sets are going to be at 30.5 inches tall and 30.5 inches wide. And then I have 1 set that's at 30.5 inches tall and 28.5 inches wide, because when I made the cabinet, evidently I didn't know how to divide correctly, and that's what happened. I'm going to use these as an example, and I'm going to show you how I did the math to figure these out. First of all, it's 30.5 inches wide and 30.5 inches tall, so we're going to just divide that in half to make it down to 15.25. So I'm just going to go ahead and take one of these out, so that from now on we're just going to be talking about one door of each set. So of this one door, we have to cut 2 rails and 2 stiles. Figure out what I needed for those dimensions, or for those lengths rather. Said the rails are pretty simple. You're just taking the overall width, which in my case, I should have said it before, the width I did a 1/2 inch overlay bigger than the size of the hole. So, and then for the stiles, which are the long ones, you have to figure out not just subtracting the rails. So you have the 30.5 inches, and you would think, well, I just subtract the 2 rails and that makes it. Well, you have to have a tongue that goes into the groove, so you have to add that back in. So to do the math for that, I take the overall length of 30.5 inches, I subtract the 2 rails, which equals out to 4.25, and then I add back on 3/4 of an inch, because I want each tongue to be 3/8 of an inch long. So that gives me an overall length of 27 inches. So that was the 30.5 inches minus 4.25, then adding in the 3/4 of an inch back into it makes it 27 inches. One thing that I did talk about that I would improve is when I cut the tongues for these, I made them the same width as the paneling, because then it made it real nice for the groove to be the same size. Next time I do it, since I had a thicker board, what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the size of this tongue to at least 3/8 of an inch wide. It'll give it a little bit more meat for it to hold on to there, and I think it'd just be a better experience overall. So that's how we cut out those boards. I'll show you how I cut them up and got them all set up. I have my 14.25, 15.25, and 27-inch boards all laid out here. What we have to do now is figure out the center of the boards. I cut a 3-inch spacer to set up the height of the table saw blade, so I can get it accurate to what I want for the depth of the cut on the rails and stiles for the groove. When I'm using the block to set it up on the table saw here, you can see that I'm slowly moving it so I can get the very tip of it in there, and then you just kind of keep raising it up and just keep playing with it until you get it right where you want it to. Then make sure you lock the blade into place. To set the width there, what I'm doing is I'm getting the center line right on the edge of the saw blade there, so that I can make 2 different cuts and make the groove. To make sure I'm getting it held in there tight, I'm going to use this feather board here to hold the board up against the fence nice and tight, so it gets a nice accurate cut. So I'm cutting a sample groove here, or a test groove. I'm using a little sample. It's basically just a cut off of one of the rails or stiles, I don't remember which one it was, that I had left over after I cut them up. So when you cut it, you're cutting it flipping it around, cutting the other side, that gets you a groove. It's not going to be the right size, but it's going to get you a start. Then I look at it, make sure it seems centered, and then we're going to have to run through the rest of them. Basically, just what I'm doing here is I'm running through them all. I know this is not going to be the correct width of the groove in the final, but I need to get it set up. As you can see, it's still a little tight, so I need to go back and widen it out. Take your time doing this on your test block, and then once you get it dialed in, go ahead and run through the rest of them. That's what I'm doing here. Once we have the grooves set up the way we want to, we're going to install these little rubber space balls. I couldn't find a cool picture of them from Amazon. I'll put the link in the description. What they do is they take up the space in between the panels and the rails and stiles so it doesn't rattle as much. So you just kind of shove them in there and then push them in with a screwdriver to set them in there real good and space them out so that it kind of is even. We have all of the grooves all cut out now. The next thing we got to do is start to work on the tongues. The first thing we're going to do here is we're going to set the fence up. I'm going to use the 3/8 inch block again there. And what I'm doing is I am setting up the block so that it's at the setting where it's the far side of the blade is at 3/8, so that it will make the tongue 3 inches long. And to set the height of it, what you have to do is very slowly keep raising the blade until you get it where it's just going to touch the bottom of that groove. You're going to have to do a few passes on this to make it right because you don't want to go too far because you want to make sure that that's as thick as possible so it can be tight in the groove of the other boards. This is where I would change it in the future. I would make this a thicker tongue because there's no reason for me to take off all that and not give it the strength that it could possibly have. So just make sure you take your time working up to that, going over it a few times. And when you're done, it'll be just a paper thin piece on there. And then when you're cutting the tongue, because I just had the one blade sitting there, you just make a few passes on it and then kind of go over it and get as clean as possible. You're going to have to go back with the chisel later and clean it up. Then just check your fitment here. You can see my joint isn't perfect, but it's the best I'm able to do. Once you get it pretty tight, just go ahead and run through all of the ends of all the stiles. And I have all of the rails and stiles laid out here with the tongues and grooves all cut out of them. Now we got all the boards for the face done. I want to show you how I measured out to cut out the panel for the inside here. The panel isn't quite as much math as the figuring out the face part of it. So for the panel, we have the 15 1/4 inches width, and then we have the 30 1/2 inches long overall. What we do to figure that out is we have the 3/8 inch groove that we put in there. We don't want to use up that entire 3/8 inch of it groove because we want to have about an 1/8 inch all the way around for expansion of this panel because it's going to expand different than the rails and stiles. Do that as you saw when we were building out the rails and stiles. I put those little space balls in there, those little rubber things, and what those do is they hold the panel in place, but they give it that ability to stretch and move around. The panel then is a lot stiffer in there. You don't hear as much of a noise with cheaper doors. When you close them, even with the soft close hinge, you'll hear like a rattling noise. These you don't hear any type of noise at all. It makes it a little bit tighter. So for the panel itself, I'll go back to the measurements because it's kind of talking in circles there. So we take the 15 1/4 inches of the top. We subtract the stiles at 4 1/4 inches, but then we add back in only a 1/2 inch of that groove We had done the 3/8, which 3/8 times 2 is 3/4. We want to leave an 1/8 inch around it, so we only add back in a 1/2 inch. And then for the sides, because the part that's the length of it is going to be the 30 1/2 inches minus the rails of 4 1/4. And then we add back in a 1/2 inch again, so it works out to be 26 1/4 inches. That's how I figured out the size of the panel for this one. I'll try to put that in there so you can understand it, hopefully. And then when you make yours, because you're going to make these sized off of whatever you're making, you're not going to make my dimensions because your cabinet's not going to be my size. So you're going to make these for whatever you need. So I'll show you how we cut those out. So I'm getting ready to assemble here, and you can see how rough the side of the tongue is. So I'm just going to take a chisel here and clean it up and get off all of the little bumps that are left from, because I didn't use a flat top blade. I'm also going to chamfer the edge a little bit, so it just makes it a little bit easier for it to set into the groove. So it's finally time to start the laying out of the actual doors and assembling them. You can see here what I'm doing is I'm looking at all of the faces of them and seeing what I want on the outside and how I want them to be laid out. Like that one has some sapwood, so I don't want to see that, so I'm going to put it down so that it's on the inside of the door and not on the face. I'm just going to check the fitment here and see if I need to clean up any more of the tongues. Just as simple as just taking the chisel and kind of smoothing them out a little bit and make sure I get rid of all the little bumps. And then make sure you go back and forth a few times and check your fitment to make sure that it's all tight in every groove. It makes it a little bit easier overall. Now that I know that everything's going to fit together, we're just going to put some glue on here. I'm just using regular wood glue, putting a little dab on each one of them, as you see, and then I just take a chip brush and spread the glue out over the entire tongue surface. That way it'll go into the groove real nice and fill everything up. Now that we got all the glued up, I'm just going to clean up a little of the glue here and start fitting them together. I found it easiest if I just assembled one of the corners and then I brought in the panel to put in there, because the panels have a little bit of a warp to them. So if you try to assemble it three sides, it was a little bit harder. So doing it this way seemed to work the best for me. Once you get the one side put in there, it's pretty simple from there. You just kind of clip it all together and then put it in the clamps. Once I have it all clamped up, I like to check that it's square, checking corner to corner, making sure they're the exact same measurement. This part's kind of cheating. I use my drum sander at 150 grit and smooth it all out. If you didn't have this, you could do it with a hand sander, but it would take quite a bit longer and probably not turn out quite as smooth. Now that I have the surfaces true, we have to true up the sides. You can see there that it hangs out a little bit. So what I do is I set the table saw to basically the width of what the tops are, and I trim off the edges. It took me a couple passes at this, but by doing this, you're cleaning up both sides and it makes it a much smoother finish to finish off with the sander. Then it comes to everybody's favorite part of sanding. I sanded it from 80, 120, and 180 grit on the faces and the sides. This is a long and tedious process, so I only show you a little bit of it, but if you sand it, you know what I'm doing here. The next step is to clean it up with mineral spirits. Go through every single board and give them a really good cleaning. Make sure that's completely dry before you try to put any type of finish on it. I ended up using Rubio Monocoat for this because I like the look that it leaves on it. I wouldn't do it quite this way again. What I would do is pre-finish everything before I assembled it, because it's a real pain and it wastes a lot of the material trying to get up all the little grooves and everything. But it turned out the way I wanted it to look. So that's it for this video. I'll show you how I installed these on the cabinet in the entire cabinet video. It's going to kind of be a bunch of the videos that I've made throughout making this cabinet. This will be just a part that you'll see during that part. Overall, it wasn't a horribly hard experience to make these. There are, like I said, a few things that I would make differently in the future to make them a little bit stronger. And hopefully I will just make sure I true up the faces on them so that they don't have to have any of the glue put in there. But other than that, I'm overall very happy with them. They are the look that I wanted. I mean, they're a simple door. They're the style I like, though. I don't really like the raised panel. I think it's just because when I was young, that's all anybody had was a raised panel, and I tend to go with walnut over like oak or anything like that because all my childhood, that's all anybody had was like the golden oak, which I'm not a huge fan of. If you are, I apologize. They're just not my style. The walnut gives it a pretty cool look. This is just a natural finish of the walnut. I didn't put any stain on this, as you saw. I just put the Rubio Monte coat on it, and that's a pure, so it has no extra adding into it. So I believe these will darken a little bit over time. Not as much as like a cherry would, but I believe the walnut will darken a little bit over time. And you're going to see some of the sapwood like here, because that's what I used with the having the end grain part of it. With that, I hope you enjoyed the video. Maybe it'll help you inspire to you get out there to make something yourself. Not necessarily cabinet doors, but just something. The idea is kind of for me to help inspire some other people out there, so that not only do I get up off my butt and actually do something and try to do good quality of it, but that maybe you figure out that you can do it as well. Once again, I want to thank you for watching this. May God bless you, and you have a great day.